Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're exploring something that, well, it touches nearly every corner of the globe. Mental health. We're talking almost 1 billion people affected worldwide.
It's a staggering number. Absolutely staggering.
And one of the biggest hurdles, as I think many of us know firsthand or secondhand, is just getting access to traditional human therapy.
Yeah.
It's so limited in so many places.
Yeah. Cost, stigma, just sheer distance sometimes. It leaves so many people without the support they desperately need.
Exactly. But what if? What if there was something emerging right now? Something scalable, lower cost, maybe even on demand, that could start bridging this huge gap?
That's the really compelling question, isn't it? And the fascinating part is how quickly technology is actually stepping up to try and meet this need. We're talking about AI-mediated therapy.
Right.
And this isn't just theory anymore. It's being actively researched. It's being refined. It's being put out there.
So for this deep dive, our mission really is to unpack how effective this AI therapy actually is. We're looking across different groups of people, different mental health needs.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to be drawing straight from, the solid stuff. Peer-reviewed studies, high-quality industry research. We want to give you the clearest, most evidence-based picture we possibly can.
So we're not just scratching the surface. We'll get into the hard clinical outcomes. Can it actually reduce symptoms of depression, anxiety, that sort of thing?
Yeah, the measurable stuff.
But also the kind of the human side. How satisfied are people using it? Do they actually stick with it? Can you even feel like a connection with an AI?
Which is crucial, right? That subjective experience matters hugely.
Absolutely. And critically, we need to dive into how researchers are studying these tools. Understanding the methods is key to knowing, how we know what works and maybe what doesn't yet.
For sure.
And, of course, we have to talk about the limits, the ethical questions, which are huge in this space, and where this whole field might be heading. So think of this as our shared journey of discovery.
And my role here is really just to help add some context, help us critically evaluate this space because it's moving so fast. It's not just what AI therapy is, but really why it matters and, crucially, how we know if it's working or maybe where it's falling short.
Building that solid understanding together.
Exactly. Empowering you, our listener, to really grasp the potential, but also the realities of this pretty groundbreaking shift.
Okay, let's start by unpacking this landscape then. AI therapy, it's not just one thing, is it? It's evolved quite a bit. #H1.
Yeah.
Unpacking the evolution of AI therapy. So when we talk about AI therapy, it's changed dramatically, even just recently. If we go way back, like the early days.
Yeah.
The 60s even. What did those systems look like? Could you even call it a conversation?
Well, yeah, you had things like ELIZA back in the 60s, which was groundbreaking for its time, but very rudimentary. In those early stages, AI therapy was basically simple, rule-based conversational agents.
Rule-based.
Meaning they followed a very strict, predefined script. Think of it like a digital chatbot working off a flowchart. If you typed, "I feel sad," it would scan for keywords like sad and pick a pre-programmed response.
Like, tell me more about feeling sad.
Exactly. Or how long have you felt this way? Very structured. If you went off script, if you said something it wasn't programmed for, it would just get confused or loop back to a generic prompt.
Okay.
They were okay for very specific things like early CBT exercises where you could control the prompts tightly, but they completely lacked the flow of a real conversation.
Right, so more like an interactive questionnaire than a chat. You could kind of feel the gears turning behind the scenes, the limitations.
Very much, yeah.
But then we hit this generative AI revolution. This is where things get really interesting, right? What exactly makes this new wave, these generative AI chatbots, so different?
You've hit the nail on the head. The dominant trend now is these generative AI chatbots, and they are worlds apart from those old rule-based systems. They use incredibly sophisticated large language models, LLMs. Think things like GPT-4, or even the more specialized fine-tuned models you see in apps like therapywithai.com.
And the key word is generative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Generate. They don't just pick an answer from a list. They're trained on absolutely massive amounts of text and code, so they learn the patterns, the structure, the nuances of human language.
Okay.
This lets them predict the most likely next word or phrase or sentence in a conversation based on everything that's been said so far. They construct new dynamic responses in real time. Responses tailored to the specific conversation.
So it's that predictive ability, that sort of statistical creativity that lets them sound more natural, more empathic even.
That's the magic, yes. It allows them to mimic empathic conversation in a way rule-based systems just fundamentally couldn't.
So how does that actually feel for the user, comparing it to those older, clunkier systems?
It's a massive difference. It's like going from reading a rigid script to having a fluid, improvised conversation. These generative AI therapists can handle truly open-ended dialogue. They get nuance better, they remember context over longer chats, they adapt the flow. It just feels much more natural and, yes, surprisingly empathetic at times.
Empathetic.
Yeah, and recent qualitative research where people actually talked about using these advanced chatbots found some really compelling things. Users described finding an emotional sanctuary.
Emotional sanctuary.
Yeah, like a safe space where they could just express themselves without judgment. Especially about sensitive stuff they might hesitate to share with a person, because of stigma or fear.
I can see that.
And they also reported getting insightful guidance, feeling like the AI actually understood their situation and offered genuinely helpful personalized support. And this seems to lead to really high engagement, a feeling of connection.
Emotional sanctuary and insightful guidance from an algorithm.
That does sound remarkably human. What is it specifically about the interaction that creates that feeling? Is it just always being available, the lack of judgment?
It's probably a mix of things.
Yeah.
Users often mention the AIs, like unwavering presence. It's there 247, no appointments, no waiting lists, no cost barriers in many cases.
Right. Immediate access.
So you can reach out right when you need it most. Late at night, sudden panic, it's there. And the non-judgmental aspect is huge. You can say anything. The AI isn't going to be chalked or burdened.
Creates a sense of safety.
Psychological safety, exactly. And then there's the adaptive listening part. Its ability to sort of remember things you've talked about before, reference details, and craft responses that feel like it really understands your specific situation. That creates this feeling, maybe an illusion, but a powerful feeling, of personalized care and empathy.
That makes a lot of sense. So for people listening, when we talk about the advanced AI therapy that's out there today, what are some real-world examples? What capabilities define the cutting edge? Well, this is exactly the type of sophisticated AI you see in the applications really pushing the envelope now. Take, for instance, therapywithai.com, which is often highlighted as a leading AI therapist app. It's built on these advanced generative principles.
Okay.
It really aims for that human-like, responsive interaction. It goes beyond just text. It's integrating things like microphone input, sound options, a real-time voice mode, making the conversation feel incredibly natural, almost like talking to someone.
Voice mode. That's interesting.
Yeah, and they're not just using off-the-shelf models either. They're fine-tuning their own proprietary models specifically for the therapeutic context, constantly improving it. The goal is really to put an empathetic, evidence-based, empowering conversation right in your pocket, making it super accessible and effective. This focus on making it feel natural, conversational, personal, that's key for getting people to actually use it and stick with it.
That shift from scripts to dynamic, empathic chat powered by LLMs, like in therapywithai.com, that's genuinely revolutionary. Which brings us right to the next big question. How do we actually know if these sophisticated tools are working? What's the science validating their impact?
Right, because understanding the impact isn't just about stories or testimonials. Those matter, but they need solid scientific backing.
Definitely.
Especially with something so new, evolving so fast, and potentially impacting public health on such a scale. We need varied, robust research designs to really get a handle on efficacy, feasibility in the real world, and how users actually perceive these tools.
So it's not just does it work, but more like who does it work for and how and why?
Precisely. Moving beyond the simple yes or no.
Okay, so when we talk rigorous research in healthcare, the gold standard usually mentioned is the randomized controlled trial, the RCT. How do those work for AI therapy? Are there specific challenges?
RCTs are absolutely foundational here, the gold standard for efficacy, just like you said. The basic idea is you randomly assign participants to different groups. One group gets the AI therapy.
And the other group?
The control group, they might be put on a wait list, or maybe they get some general health information like an ebook. Sometimes they might even get another active treatment like a different app, or maybe even human support for comparison.
Okay.
Then you measure changes in symptoms using validated scales questionnaires, basically before they start, right after the intervention period, and maybe weeks or months later as a follow-up.
And the challenges?
Well, things like blinding are tough. It's pretty hard to hide from participants whether they're chatting with an AI or reading an ebook.
Yeah, because that's obvious.
And there's the Hawthorne effect. People might feel better just because they're getting attention in a study. Researchers use clever statistics to try and account for these things, but there are always factors to consider.
Can you give us some examples of early RCTs that kind of paved the way here?
Sure. Some key early ones. There was a 2-week RCT of Wobot. That's a well-known CBT-based chatbot. They tested it with young adults, comparing it against an information ebook looking mainly at depression and anxiety.
Okay, Wobot.
Another significant one was a 4-week RCT of a chatbot called Tess, also with college students, similar outcomes. And more recently, the designs have gotten more sophisticated,
How so?
like a multi-arm RCT in China. They tested their CBT chatbot, Xiaoyi, not just against an ebook, but also against a general chat agent one that just made small talk, no actual therapy content.
Oh, that's smart, to isolate the therapeutic effect.
Exactly. It helps figure out if the benefit comes from the structured therapy content delivered by the AI or just from, having any kind of interaction.
Makes sense. And how are they measuring these outcomes? You mentioned scales, but what exactly are they tracking?
They use established, validated psychometric scales, standard tools. For depression, you'll often see the PHQ-9, the Patient Health Questionnaire 9. It asks things like, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you felt down, or had trouble sleeping, or poor appetite? You rate each one.
And for anxiety?
Commonly, the GAD-7, Generalized Anxiety Disorder 7-item scale, asks about feeling nervous, unable to stop worrying, feeling restless. These give objective scores we can track over time.
Okay, so PHQ-9, GAD-7, standard measures.
Yeah, but it's not just about symptoms. Researchers also look at secondary things like user engagement, how often do people log in, how long do they chat for, do they complete the modules?
How sticky is it, basically?
Exactly. And even things like therapeutic alliance ratings. Do users feel a sense of connection or trust with the AI? They use modified versions of scales usually used for human therapists.
Interesting. So RCTs give us the hard efficacy data in controlled settings. But life isn't a controlled setting. People use these apps on the bus late at night. How do we study that real-world use?
That's where observational and feasibility studies become really important. You've hit a key point. RCTs are great for can it work, but not always how it works in the messy real world. Yeah. These other studies, often open label, meaning no strict control group, are vital for looking at practicality, accessibility, how people really use the AI when nobody is watching, so to speak. And do symptoms still change in those less structured settings?
So they focus more on feasibility. Like, does this even work logistically?
Exactly. Feasibility, usage patterns, pre versus post-symptom changes. They help find barriers. Why do people stop using it? They gather feedback on the actual user experience day to day.
Are there specific examples where these real-world studies gave us unique insights?
Absolutely. There was a great feasibility trial using a Wobot adaptation for new mothers. Postpartum mental health, a really critical, often underserved group. They looked at usage, mood outcomes, practicality.
Makes sense.
Another one, during the height of COVID, tested a chatbot for loneliness in older adults, specifically 65 plus, comparing them to a slightly younger group. While these aren't as definitive on cure efficacy as an RCT, they give crucial insights into whether people accept the tool, the practical hurdles, how to improve it for real-world deployment.
Kind of like pilot studies.
Yeah, essentially. Testing the waters, refining the approach before or alongside those big, expensive RCTs. They tell us if it's workable and if people actually want to use it.
So it sounds like we need both the hard numbers and the qualitative human experience.
Right.
Which brings us to that qualitative and user experience research. How does that help us understand the human element beyond just symptom scores?
This is absolutely vital because, like we said, engagement and adoption depends so much on how users feel interacting with the AI. It's not just, did my score go down? Yeah. Did I find this meaningful, supportive, trustworthy?
Right.
Qualitative methods, things like in-depth interviews, focus groups, open-ended survey questions, let researchers gather that rich narrative feedback directly from users. It gets beyond the how much to the how and the why.
Understanding the experience.
Exactly. Their perceptions, their emotional responses, where the AI met their expectations and where it fell short.
And what kind of themes pop up consistently in these qualitative studies? What are people saying?
Some really interesting themes emerge. Like, in studies with these newer generative AI chatbots, people talk about this joy of connection, feeling heard, understood, even comforted by the AI.
Wow, joy of connection.
Yeah, and they openly compare it sometimes favorably, sometimes not, to experiences with human therapists, which gives really nuanced insights into the pros and cons of each.
I bet.
This research flags up the common likes, the feeling of accountability from regular check-ins, that non-judgmental support, especially for sensitive topics, but also the common dislikes when the bot misunderstands, gives generic answers, or technical glitches break the spell.
Right, the frustration points.
Exactly. And that direct, unfiltered feedback is gold dust for developers trying to improve the AI's conversation skills, its emotional intelligence, the whole experience. It shows where the AI shines and where it still needs work.
Okay, so we have RCTs for efficacy, observational studies for real-world use, qualitative research for the user experience. And then, to get the biggest picture, we have meta-analyses and systematic reviews. What do they add to the mix?
Think of these as the studies of studies. They synthesize findings from multiple individual studies. A meta-analysis statistically combines the results of, say, dozens of RCTs to estimate the average benefit of AI therapy across all those trials.
So, a bird's eye view.
Exactly. It gives a comprehensive overview, looking past the quirks of any single study. It helps spot broader patterns, and they often go a step further, looking at moderators. Factors that might influence the results, like, does personalizing the AI's responses make a difference? Does using specific therapy techniques like CBT matter? Do the newer generative AI models lead to better outcomes than older ones?
So teasing out what makes it work better.
Precisely. It helps us understand not just if it works generally, but what specific features might be more effective for certain people or problems. They provide that broad, comprehensive perspective.
It really sounds like a layered approach. Combining all these methods gives us the most robust understanding. Okay, with that foundation laid, let's get into the actual results. What does the data say about clinical outcomes? All right, this is the crucial part. All this research. What's the bottom line on efficacy? Does AI therapy actually move the needle on mental health symptoms?
The overall consensus from all that aggregated evidence, it's pretty clear. Yes, AI-driven interventions do lead to statistically significant improvements in common mental health symptoms.
Okay, significant improvements.
Now, the effects are generally described as modest, meaning they're real and measurable, but maybe not always as large as what you might see with, say, intensive human therapy for very severe conditions, but they are consistently positive, especially in the short term.
Modest but consistent. And is there a key study that sums this up?
Yeah, one of the most comprehensive summaries comes from a big 2023 meta-analysis. He and colleagues looked at 32 RCTs, covering about 6,100 participants, all focused on these conversational agents for mental health. It gives us a really solid statistical overview.
Okay, 32 trials, 6,100 people. What did they find? What does modest improvement look like in numbers? How should we interpret that?
So they found small but statistically significant pooled effect sizes. They use a metric called Hedges G. For depression, it was around 0.29. For generalized anxiety, also around 0.29 compared to the control groups.
Hedges G 0.29. What does that actually mean for someone using it?
Okay, think of it this way. A Hedges G of 0.29 suggests that the average person using the chatbot experienced more improvement than about 62% of the people in the control group.
62%. Okay, so for more than half the users, it's making a noticeable difference compared to doing nothing or just getting basic info.
Exactly. It's a tangible shift. For many users, it might be enough to lift them out of a clinically significant symptom range, or at least give them a real sense of relief they didn't have before. It might not be a cure for severe illness, but it's helping a lot of people move from really struggling to managing better. Often, it's the first step, an accessible line of support.
That's a really helpful way to frame it. A significant first step. Did the meta-analysis find other positive effects besides reducing depression and anxiety?
Yes, it did. They also reported positive short-term effects on reducing stress, general distress, and improvements in overall quality of life and well-being, and just a general reduction in overall mental health symptoms.
Broader benefits, too.
Yeah, if you look at their summary table, you'd see similar small to moderate positive effects across these areas. It suggests it's not just hitting specific disorders, but contributing to a wider sense of feeling better, functioning better day to day. People report feeling more in control, less overwhelmed.
And how do these results stack up against other digital tools, like those older apps that just have reading modules, not really AI chat?
That's a great question. The benefits are actually pretty comparable to what we see with traditional digital mental health apps overall, which also tend to show small but significant effects. Where the AI chatbots potentially differentiate themselves is how they deliver that support through that engaging conversational interaction rather than just static text. It suggests AI chatbots are definitely a clinically meaningful option, especially for mild to moderate symptoms or as an early intervention. They're holding their own and maybe even surpassing simpler tools because they can be more engaging.
Got it. Can we point to any specific studies that really show these effects clearly? Like a concrete example?
Sure. That Stanford Wobot RCT from 2017 is a classic example. College students using Wobot for just 2 weeks showed significantly bigger drops in depression scores on that PHQ-9 scale compared to the control group who just read an ebook. The effect size between groups was moderate, around 0.44.
Okay, a clear difference.
Yeah, a solid demonstration. And the test chatbot RCT also reported significant reductions in both depression and anxiety for the chatbot users compared to controls over a few weeks. These individual studies really back up the overall meta-analysis finding. AI therapy can provide tangible, evidence-based improvements in mood and anxiety in the short term.
Okay, so depression and anxiety are the main focus. But you mentioned broader effects. Is AI therapy being used for other things too, beyond those core areas?
Absolutely. It's not just limited to depression and anxiety. Its applications are definitely diversifying.
Like what?
Well, we mentioned stress and general distress helping people manage daily life pressures. Although, interestingly, boosting positive feelings seems a bit harder for AI. Users feel less bad, but getting them to feel actively more positive or deeply resilient might need more than just the AI, maybe human encouragement too.
That makes sense. Reducing the negatives is one thing. Building the positive is another layer. What about something like loneliness? That's a huge issue, especially for older adults. Can an AI companion actually help with that feeling of isolation?
This is one of the most fascinating and maybe surprising areas. Yes, it seems AI companions can help alleviate loneliness, especially in vulnerable groups. There was a compelling study from Taiwan in 2024 during COVID isolation. They gave a chatbot to older outpatient adults, average age about 65. After 4 weeks, the group aged 65 and over showed significantly improved loneliness scores, and they were using the chatbot a lot, daily.
Wow. But only the 65-plus group.
Interestingly, yes, a slightly younger group in the study, aged 50-64, didn't show the same significant change. It suggests the AI was particularly helpful for those most at risk of deep isolation.
So an AI could genuinely be like a companion, an AI friend for seniors, providing conversation and company. That's quite powerful.
Exactly. It suggests AI can fill a critical gap for social connection. And those older users in the study, they gave the chatbot really high usability and satisfaction ratings, often over 5 out of 7, which tells us that older adults can be open to this tech, especially if it's designed well.
That's encouraging. Like the focus on usability in apps like therapywithai.com, making it accessible, matters.
Definitely. Intuitive design, maybe larger text, clear voice options, it all helps overcome potential digital divides. The AI offers that judgment-free chat, that sense of presence, even prompts for reflection, things that can be invaluable if you're feeling disconnected.
Incredible. And beyond loneliness or stress, are there specific disorders or populations where AI is being tailored?
Yes, definitely. They're adapting these tools for very specific needs. Postpartum depression is a great example. New mothers face unique challenges, often barriers to care.
For sure.
So a Wobot adaptation was tested in a Stanford trial for postpartum women. It showed high feasibility, women used it, liked it, and it showed early signs of actually reducing their depression symptoms compared to usual care.
That's fantastic. Any other areas?
Research is also exploring AI for substance use disorders, helping manage chronic pain, even improving sleep, providing structured support that can complement or maybe even extend traditional care.
So the evidence is definitely building across a range of areas, showing real symptom reduction, positive user experiences. But what about the long haul? Do these benefits stick around?
The long-term picture. That's a really important question, and honestly, it's an area where we need more research.
Right.
The evidence is strongest for short-term effects. Studies looking at 4 to 12 weeks post-intervention. Meta-analyses suggest that when you look further out, say 3 or 4 months or longer, the effects tend to diminish. Often, they're not statistically significant anymore.
So the benefits might fade over time.
It seems that way based on current data. It doesn't mean the short-term benefits aren't real or valuable. They absolutely are. But it implies that just using the chatbot for a few weeks might not be enough for lasting change.
So what does that mean? Keep using it forever?
It might mean that maintaining the gains requires continued use of the bot, or maybe periodic check-ins with a human therapist, or perhaps different engagement strategies to keep people connected long-term. It suggests AI therapy might work best as ongoing support or part of a blended approach rather than a one-shot fix. How to sustain those benefits is a really active area of research right now.
That's a critical piece because, like you said, even the best intervention won't work if people don't stick with it, which leads us perfectly into the human side, user satisfaction and engagement. Okay, we know the clinical outcomes look promising, at least short term. But as you just highlighted, if people don't actually use these tools or if they hate the experience, the outcomes don't matter much in the real world. Why is engagement such a big deal for AI therapy?
It's paramount, absolutely paramount, because it directly determines if the tool has any real-world impact. You can have the most effective intervention ever designed on paper, but if users drop off after a week because it's boring or frustrating, its public health value is basically zero.
Right.
And keeping users engaged over time is a known challenge for all digital mental health tools. It's not unique to AI.
So how do chatbots try to tackle this?
Well, their core design is interactive and conversational. That's their main advantage over, say, just reading static articles or watching videos. They try to build a relationship, embed themselves more naturally into daily life.
And does it work? Do people actually stick with these chatbots more than other apps based on the studies?
In controlled trials, yes, the engagement often looks pretty good, sometimes better than purely self-guided apps. Like that Wobot college study, participants chatted with Wobot about 12 times in just 2 weeks. That's almost daily interaction.
It's pretty frequent.
Yeah, much higher compliance than you often see with apps where the user has to remember to open it entirely on their own. Or that Chinese Xiaoyi chatbot trial, young adults averaged over 1 session per day during their week with it. And importantly, that study found better retention in the chatbot group compared to controls. The interaction seemed to hold their attention better.
Okay, so promising numbers in trials. But what about outside the lab? When the novelty wears off, does dropout become a bigger issue? Let's be real.
Unfortunately, yes. That's the reality check. Dropout is still a significant challenge across digital health generally. Initial engagement might be strong, people are curious, but once that novelty fades or maybe their immediate symptoms feel a bit better, usage often drops off.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
One review pointed out that often only a small fraction of users are still active after a month or so. It's a tough nut to crack sustaining that engagement long term.
So what are developers doing to try and keep people hooked in a good way?
They're trying lots of things. Personalized reminders, gamification elements like tracking streaks for consistent use, and crucially, making the dialogue more adaptive and dynamic so it doesn't feel repetitive. The AI needs to evolve with the user. The goal is shifting from just novelty to actual habit formation.
Makes sense. And you mentioned earlier that sticking with it longer seemed linked to better outcomes in the meta-analyses. Is there a dose-response relationship?
Absolutely. That was a key finding. The meta-analysis showed a clear trend. Interventions that lasted longer generally had larger effect sizes.
So more use equals more benefit, generally speaking.
Exactly. It suggests that if you can keep users engaged over more weeks or months, they actually get more therapeutic value, which points to that positive feedback loop. Engagement leads to better outcomes, which hopefully motivates more engagement.
Right.
It really underscores why finding ways to sustain usage is so critical, and why there's so much interest now in hybrid models.
Hybrid models.
Yeah, blending the AI chatbot with some level of human support. Maybe a human coach checks in occasionally, offers encouragement, helps troubleshoot, combining the scalability and availability of AI with the nuance and accountability of a human touch. That's showing a lot of promise for boosting long-term adherence.
Interesting. Okay, so engagement is key, and longer engagement seems better. But what about just satisfaction? Do people actually like using these AI therapists as a good experience?
Generally, yes. The data suggests users report moderate to high satisfaction overall. This comes from rating scales in studies, surveys, and that qualitative feedback we talked about. The overall sentiment is usually positive, often more positive than people might expect before trying it.
Can you give an example from a study? How satisfied were people?
Sure. Back to that Wobot RCT again. They asked participants to rate overall satisfaction on a 5-point scale. The Wobot users averaged around 4.3 out of 5. That's pretty high, indicates they liked it, found it beneficial.
And the control group?
They averaged about 3.4 out of 5 for the ebook, so significantly higher satisfaction with the chatbot. Wobot users also consistently rated the content as more helpful and engaging. And remember that stat, 100% of Wobot users felt they learned something new versus 77% of the control group. That really speaks to perceived value.
100% is impressive. But were there common complaints too? Areas where users felt the AI fell short?
Oh, definitely. It's not all glowing reviews. In a trial of another chatbot, Wysa, in Canada, people liked the app's features, but a common critique was about the chatbot's conversational limits. Some found it a bit repetitive or not quite capturing the nuance of what they were trying to say, not truly human-like.
Yeah, that seems to be a recurring theme.
It is. Users really value the 24/7 availability, the non-judgmental ear, huge advantages. But they can get frustrated if the bot gives canned responses, misunderstands complex feelings, or just feels a bit robotic sometimes.
So it really boils down to managing expectations, doesn't it? Knowing it's an AI, not a person.
Exactly. Transparency is crucial. Good platforms are upfront about this. Wobot tells you it's a self-help tool, not a crisis line or a therapist replacement. And leading apps like therapywithai.com aim for that highly human-like feel. But they're still clear it's an AI, setting realistic expectations about its capabilities and limitations.
And what are those core advantages people cite again?
The big ones are anonymity and convenience. Being able to open up about really sensitive things without fearing stigma or judgment is massive. And doing it whenever, wherever, from your own phone, that removes huge barriers that stop people seeking traditional help.
Definitely. And what about acceptability across different groups? Especially maybe older adults or people less comfortable with tech. Are they finding AI therapy okay to use?
This has been a really encouraging finding. Even groups you might think would be hesitant, like postpartum women or older adults, are generally finding these tools acceptable and usable.
That's great.
That postpartum chatbot trial, high retention, positive feedback on convenience. And studies with older adults using AI therapy, like the kind therapywithai.com offers, have shown really high usability scores, often over 6 out of 7.
6 out of 7 is high for usability, especially for older adults.
It really is. It shows that with thoughtful design, clear interface, maybe larger text, voice options older individuals can comfortably use and even enjoy AI therapy. It helps challenge that idea of digital divide being an insurmountable barrier, especially for things like tackling loneliness in that population.
So putting it all together, it sounds like user satisfaction generally lines up with the clinical results.
Mm-hmm.
If the AI is engaging, well-designed, feels somewhat empathic, people tend to like it, stick with it, and see benefits. But it's not for everyone.
That's the perfect synthesis. User responses are, I'd say, cautiously optimistic to enthusiastic. High engagement and satisfaction are achievable. Many people do feel a connection, valuing the constant, non-judgmental support. But yeah, it's not universal. Some will find it too impersonal. Some might get frustrated by conversational loops or repetition and drop out. It highlights the need for ongoing refinement, more personalization, and always remembering that human therapy holds a unique, vital place, especially for complex issues.
Okay. We've painted a largely positive picture, promising results, decent satisfaction, but let's ground ourselves. No technology is perfect, especially not one dealing with something as complex and sensitive as mental health. What are the big limitations researchers and developers are still wrestling with when it comes to AI therapy?
That's a really crucial reality check. While the progress is impressive, AI therapy absolutely has significant limitations. One big one is the potential for what's sometimes called AI hallucination.
Hallucination, like making things up.
Essentially, yes. The AI generates responses that sound plausible, maybe even confident, but are actually factually incorrect, irrelevant, or completely fabricated. While developers work hard to minimize this in therapeutic models, making sure they stick to evidence-based techniques, it's an inherent risk with current generative AI, especially if the conversation drifts off topic.
That sounds worrying in a therapeutic context.
It is. Another major limitation is the AI's inability to handle genuine crisis situations effectively. It lacks real judgment, sentience, the ability to truly understand the severity of a situation or intervene spontaneously in a life-threatening moment.
So it can't tell if someone is truly at risk.
It might be programmed to recognize certain keywords related to self-harm or crisis, but it can't assess intent or context reliably like a trained human can. It can't provide immediate, nuanced crisis support or activate emergency protocols appropriately. This is why reputable platforms are very clear. They are not a substitute for crisis services and usually provide direct links to human-run hotlines or emergency contacts.
Okay, so not for acute crises. What about that core therapeutic element, empathy? Can an AI truly be empathetic?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Philosophically and practically. Current AI can definitely mimic empathy very effectively. It uses sophisticated language, reflects feelings, validates experiences, making users feel heard and understood.
But it's mimicking, not feeling.
Oh, exactly. It doesn't have subjective experience, consciousness, or genuine emotions. It's running on algorithms and data patterns, not lived experience. This means it inevitably misses the deep nuances of complex human emotions, cultural contexts, intricate personal histories, and especially around trauma. It can offer tools, cognitive reframing, structured support, but not that profound relational healing that often comes from genuine human connection and shared vulnerability.
That difference between mimicking empathy and truly feeling it seems vital. What about more practical issues? Data privacy must be huge.
Paramount. Absolutely paramount. Users are sharing incredibly sensitive personal mental health data. Robust encryption, strict anonymization where possible, secure data storage. These aren't optional, they're essential. A data breach could be devastating.
And are the regulations keeping up?
That's part of the challenge. Regulatory bodies are working on it, but the tech often moves faster than the regulations. Defining clear standards for data collection, usage, protection, and user control in this specific context is an ongoing process globally.
Okay. And what about relying on it too much?
That's another concern. Over-reliance or dependency. While we want people to engage, we don't want the AI to become a crutch that replaces real-world social support networks or prevents someone from seeking necessary human professional care when it's indicated. The goal is augmentation, not isolation.
Right. And the digital divide.
Still an issue. Access requires a smartphone, reliable internet, a certain level of digital literacy. We need to be mindful that this could inadvertently exclude some of the very people who might benefit most, but lack the resources or skills. Ensuring equitable access is key.
Those are some serious limitations. Right. Moving slightly, let's talk ethics. Beyond just what the tech can't do, what are the primary ethical implications we need to consider as AI therapy gets bigger? What should we be doing?
Ethics are front and center in this field, or they certainly should be. A major concern is bias baked into the algorithms.
Bias.
AI models learn from the data they're trained on. If that data reflects existing societal biases around race, gender, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, even biases about certain mental health conditions, the AI can learn and then perpetuate or even amplify those biases in its interactions.
So it could give biased advice or treat people differently based on their background.
Potentially, yes. Ensuring the training data is diverse, representative, and rigorously vetted for bias is a massive ongoing challenge. Then there's the risk of, say, misdiagnosis or inappropriate guidance. While most therapeutic AIs currently avoid giving formal diagnoses, a poorly designed AI might misinterpret symptoms or offer advice that isn't suitable, especially for complex cases, potentially delaying someone from getting the right human help.
And that black box problem you hear about with AI not knowing exactly why it gives a certain response, that must be an ethical issue too.
Definitely. The lack of full interpretability in many advanced LLMs makes it hard to audit exactly how the AI reached a conclusion or why it suggested a particular therapeutic path. This poses challenges for accountability if something goes wrong, for identifying and correcting bias systematically, and for ensuring the AI consistently adheres to evidence-based practices and ethical clinical guidelines.
How can you trust it if you don't know how it's thinking?
Precisely. And finally, informed consent is more complex than just ticking a box. Users need to genuinely understand they're talking to an algorithm, not a person. They need clarity on what data is collected, how it will be used, who might access it, and the AI's limitations, including the lack of crisis support. This needs to be communicated incredibly clearly and accessibly. These are tough ethical knots to untangle, but having these conversations openly and proactively is essential for responsible development.
These limitations and ethical flags really ground the conversation, don't they? It's exciting tech, but it needs incredibly careful handling. #tag outro.
Wow, we have covered so much ground today. It's been fascinating. Just to recap the main takeaways from our deep dive. AI therapy is clearly emerging as a really valuable addition to the mental health toolkit. It offers something accessible, often lower cost, and available on demand. And the evidence shows that when it's well designed and used right, it can significantly reduce symptoms for common issues like depression, anxiety, even loneliness, across a wide range of people.
Yeah, the potential for broadening access is huge.
And crucially, people generally seem to find it engaging and helpful. They report feeling supported, maybe even forming a bond, often valuing that non-judgmental, always there presence.
That user acceptance piece is so important and largely positive so far. But it's vital we keep hitting that note of nuance. It is not a one-size-fits-all fix. It's not magic.
Right. Not a replacement for everything. Exactly. Its real strength currently seems to be in augmenting traditional care, providing that crucial early support, or filling gaps when human help just isn't available or affordable. Think of it as a bridge, a powerful tool in the ecosystem, but not a substitute for the depth and complexity of human empathy, judgment, and relationship, especially when dealing with severe or very complex mental health conditions. It works alongside human expertise, not instead of it.
Absolutely well said. A bridge, not a replacement. So looking ahead, what's the roadmap? What can we realistically expect in the next few years as this tech keeps getting smarter, especially with platforms like therapywithai.com constantly improving?
Well, the trajectory is definitely towards more powerful, more nuanced, even more human-like AI therapists. We'll see improvements in understanding natural language, maybe detecting emotional tone more accurately from text or voice, and definitely more personalization, tailoring the approach to the individual's specific needs, progress, and even their communication style.
So even more tailored conversations.
Yeah, platforms like therapywithai.com are right at the cutting edge there, refining conversation flows, adding features like real-time voice, fine-tuning their models specifically for therapy. We'll likely see more of those hybrid models too, blending AI with human coaching, becoming more mainstream, trying to get the best of both worlds, scalability and the human touch.
Makes sense.
But with all that increasing power comes, a massive responsibility. As a society, we have to ensure safety, equity, and ongoing validation of efficacy. It demands continued, rigorous research checking both clinical outcomes and user experience, and proactively tackling those ethical challenges head on. It can't be an afterthought.
It really does feel like it could reshape access to care.
Yeah.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners. Imagine a future where a genuinely supportive, evidence-based, maybe even empowering therapeutic conversation is literally just in your pocket, available to anyone, anywhere, anytime. What does that world look like? How might that fundamentally change how we approach mental well-being, maybe for generations to come?
It's a powerful vision. The research gives us solid grounds for optimism about broadening access and support, but also a very clear reminder that we need careful, ethical, and evidence-driven development every step of the way. The conversation about the technology is just as important as the technology itself.
Couldn't agree more. And that's our deep dive for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of AI therapy. We hope you feel more informed, maybe a bit more hopeful about where mental health support could be heading. Until next time.